Okay, so this is designed to give you a very quick overview of writing the methods section for your research project. Okay, so basically the methods is describing what you did. Now the reason there's an asterisk next to this first sentence is just down the bottom you'll see you can't write the methods until you've completely done the data collection, because the idea of the methods is you're describing what you did. However, what you might do to get a head start is to start writing the methods up in advance and just make sure that when you word it as in what you did. So basically you write a short section to tell someone how you carried out your study. So the idea is that this section will allow a reader to judge your validity and your reliability. So by having a good method section, you'll be able to pick up sort of bonus marks, if you like, for how well you've planned your study. And so it allows people to scrutinise your methods, and ultimately a reader could be critical of how you've carried out your project. Ultimately, but writing a really good methods would allow someone to actually follow the same set of instructions and carry out exactly the same piece of research. So it does need to be quite detailed. So the ideal methods, it should be very clear and precise. Okay, and this is quite important because this section doesn't really allow for you to waffle. You really need to get straight to the point and just tell the reader exactly what you did. You need to obviously explain what was done. You need to explain how you did it, so be specific in terms of how you carried out the tests. And in some respects, but not necessarily all, you need to be able to justify. So you need to be able to tell the reader why you chose to do certain things in the way that you did. So for example, you might choose to justify your reasons behind choosing a certain test, which of course links to things like criterion validity. You'll also need to talk about the analysis. So this is how you did the statistics. And of course, this is really about showing your knowledge of statistical tests. And again, you can't write this until you've done them. Although, of course, in advance, you should know what your statistical tests are going to be. But you'll need to reference what statistical test you used. And again, there might be some reasoning as to why. Okay, so the easiest way to look at a method section is to divide it with these 6 subtitles. So when you start your methods, I would put these 6 subtitles in, and this will then guide you as to what you need to write. So if we look at the first bit, participants. In this section, again, a short paragraph, you need to basically highlight the participants that you've used in your study. So for example, you might need to tell the reader how many subjects you've chosen. You'll need to tell us a little bit about their basic demographics, so height, weight, gender, whether they're sports students, whether they're college students, whether they're amateur football players, whether they're professional soccer players. The point is you need to give a little bit of background as to who they are. You may, of course, as part of your study, had a selection criteria. So it's quite possible that only people that were footballers that had played for more than 5 years might have been able to take a part in your study. If this was a selection criteria, you'll need to make sure that it's clear in this section. The key thing is to only give relevant information. If it's not relevant to know certain things about subjects, then don't state them. So just state the basics about your subjects that have particular relevance to the study. Okay, so the ethics section then. The ethics section is again just a brief section showing that you have made sure you have complied with ethical procedures. Again, it just shows your understanding of ethics. So you'll be aware that whilst some research studies you need talk about an ethics committee, that's not relevant for you guys because you're at the college. You will, however, need to talk about consent. So you'll need to talk about how you got consent, what the process was behind that. Again, obviously, if there were any under 18s, did you have to use any special consent rules? You'll also need to talk about what you explained to participants before they signed the consent and why that was important. Hopefully somewhere within your ethics section you'll mention that all your subjects had the right to withdraw at any time and that they were complete volunteers, and you'll also talk about the confidentiality of data. So you'll be able to tell them obviously or tell the reader that you kept all data confidential and how you did that. Okay, the sort of preparation section, you can talk about, this might be where you carried out some pilot testing. So for example, if you have a practice testing, how you did the practice testing and whether any issues came up. So for example, in this section you might talk about how you originally chose the bleep test to carry out your cardiovascular endurance testing, and then you decided after some pilot work that this was the wrong choice of test and you actually picked the Cooper run instead. So this might just be a nice little session that you might include. Okay, then we've got the main one, we've got the protocol. This is basically the what and how of the study. So this is basically showing how you carried out the testing from beginning to end. You might want to give a brief overview to start with, and particularly this is where schematics come in handy, because a sort of a picture or diagram showing the whole study overall is a much nicer way to start. You might want to talk about some of the baseline tests that you started with. Maybe you did some height and weight to get going, and then you'll need to talk about how you manipulated your independent variable, basically what you changed. So this might be the difference between the caffeine and the non-caffeine condition, or the fatigue and the non-fatigue condition. So really this is where you'll have to add the detail about what tests you did, how you did them, and in what order. So here's an example schematic, a very basic one, but it does just give you the idea that all subjects would do a multi-stage fitness test first, followed by 7 days rest. They would then do the control condition, followed by 7 days rest, followed by the experimental condition. So it's just a nice real quick overview. Okay, so then we look at measurements. So you might have mentioned in the protocol section about the test you're going to do. You might state here what measurements you're taking and how. So again, if you've mentioned earlier that you're doing the multi-stage fitness test, here you would talk about what you're actually measuring. So you would state here, for example, that you'll be measuring the heart rate when they finish, and also the level and the shuttle that they achieve. So again, it just makes it very clear exactly what variables you're measuring. And again, if you haven't done already, you need to make sure that you're referencing the equipment that you've used. You may also need to talk about some calculations. So for example, the beep test requires you to change the shuttle score into a VO2 max score, and you'll need to explain how you did that. Okay, and then pretty much the last section, the data analysis. This is basically just showing a paragraph on how you managed to process the data. So for example, you'll need to talk about whether you used t-tests or correlations. If you had to make any special changes to these, you'll need to talk about those. We've talked lots about the magic p-value, and of course the magic p-value is 0.05, and again you'll need to mention that you've used that. You'll also need to reference the piece of software you use. So you might use SPSS, which is the statistical software, or you might use Microsoft Excel. Okay, whichever one you land up using, you need to reference that you've used it. Okay, so here's a quick example of a very short data analysis section. So you can see there that I've referenced that I've used Microsoft Excel. I've then highlighted I've used a dependent t-test, and I've also, because I've used lots of t-tests on the same set of data, I've used the Bonferroni correction. So I've just, again, it's very brief, this section. You'd probably want to talk about maybe the p-value that you've used here, and also what specific variables you've looked at with the t-tests. But it's a good start. Okay, obviously you might need to talk, if you're doing qualitative analysis, about how you did qualitative analysis. So we talked about coding and the 3 types of coding, how you managed to organise all the different word responses into one, and also the themes and patterns that you've identified. This applies more for qualitative analysis, which most groups this year aren't doing. Now, the writing style for a method section needs to be very direct and precise. So the idea is you're very much to the point, you're very relevant, very clear. Just use those 6 subsections, and there's no need to sort of use lots and lots of references. Maybe only where you got the test from, and maybe just backing up. But you shouldn't be doing a whole literature review here. You've done that already. So just keep it to the point. As I've said earlier, please make sure you reference the equipment you use. So for example, when you've used a video camera, in brackets you would put the make and the model, and again if you've used a piece of software, you would put the make and the piece of software that you've used. If you get really stuck here, the good things for you to do would be to go to iLearn and have a look at the checklist and have a look at the lectures that you've been through. You can also have a look through the validity and reliability videos on YouTube and also the lectures. But another good way of doing it is using similar research papers. So actually looking at what other researchers are writing in their methods and have a look at the style and the way they write it, because actually that's pretty much what you need to do. It's really, really good if you actually use those 6 subtitles to sketch a brief framework. That'll really help you. And then that way all you've got to do is go through each section. You are being very descriptive here. There's no extra marks for being ultra analytical. You just need to say what you did. Okay, that's it.